I'm going to show you the best infill settings for Cura for both increased strength and speed, and we're starting right now. Hey, welcome to the first layer of the show that explores the world of 3D printing. My name is Richard. I'm here with you every Wednesday and Saturday night, and what we do on this show is we discuss things that could make your printing life a little bit better, either through reviews to give you better buying decisions, or through what we're doing today, and that is a hands-on with Cura Infill today. I'm going to walk you through it, show you what the different infill patterns are, and I'm also going to give you some hints on what you can use for different types of models that you're building. So we're going to get into it real quick here, but if you're new here today, please consider hitting that subscribe button. Also, click that little bell so you get notified every time that we do a brand new episode so you don't miss any of our future episodes. All right, let's get right into the video. We're going to jump over to the desktop and we're going to load up Cura. Okay, so we're here in Cura 4.5, which is the latest iteration of Cura as of the taping of this episode. Since Cura 3.6, there have been 13 types of infills available for you to use. We're going to go through them. We've organized them so that we go from low strength right up to flexibles. So let's get started and dive right in. Now, models such as the one that you see here, this is our basic XYZ cube that was created by the first layer. This will be available for you to download from our Facebook page in the file section, and it will be up on Thingiverse fairly soon as well. We'll get you some links to all that. We'll put them up in the card or we'll put them down in the description. So first and foremost, let's take a look at this. Now, we've got this set to an 80 by 80 by 80 millimeter cube. The actual file is 20 by 20, so what we've done is we've just increased the size by 400%, just so that we can illustrate what the different types of infill are. So we want to start first of all with our top view. We're going to zoom in on that top view so we can see it a little bit better. And we're going to go up to our quality standards here. We'll just right click on, or left click on that, pardon me, and we'll go down to infill. When we open up infill, you'll see that there's all kinds of interesting little adjustments that you can make. First and foremost, if your screen does not look like this and it looks like this, you want to make sure that you hit custom to open all of this up. Now, when you see some of this, you may not have all of these menu items open that we do. If you don't, it's real easy to do. You want to go up to Preferences, Configure Cura, go to where it says Settings, and make sure that that box right here under Visibility Settings is checked for all. And then it's going to turn everything on and you will have everything available to you. So we've already done that. Let's go ahead and start looking at infill. It's the third menu item down. We're going to open it up. When we first look at it, we can hover over infill density and it's going to give us a little flyout which adjusts the density of the infill for your print. So in our case right now we have 20%. This affects your top layers, your bottom layers, your infill line distance, your infill pattern, and infill overlap. Now, if you want to know a little bit more about what all can be done in infill and you haven't yet, I would suggest you go to the marketplace and open up or add in the plugin for the Cura settings guide. And when you've got it installed, you'll find it right here under extensions called Cura settings guide. And if we look at that, we can go in and we can have a look at infill, and let's just look at infill density, and you can see there's a lot more information here about infill density. If you want to go to infill patterns, you can go through each and every one of these on your own, and I encourage you to do so. If you haven't yet installed this plugin, I'm going to link to a card up in the right hand corner here so that you can have a look at the infill pattern or how to add in the plugin so that you can get that plugin for this. So let's start with models that need low strength, and this is a great case for that. This doesn't need a lot of strength. So if we go over to preview where we can see what this model is going to do. Currently, it's going to take us 15 hours and 44 minutes. And if we just go down beyond the top layers, we can see what that cubic looks like. But for low strength models, what you want to use is lines. Okay? So once we load up the lines here, this is typically the one you would use for low strength. We've got it set to 20%. We can change that, of course. That's going to give you a fair amount of strength, but it's also going to be 16 hours and 5 minutes at 20% infill. So the next one we want to look at is your standard 3D prints infill, and this would be for your models like statues and stuff that's not going to get handled a lot, but might get handled a little bit. You can use grid, triangles, or trihexagons. And again, we can find all of those under this listing. Your functional 3D prints for high strength, you would want to use either cubic, cubic subdivision, octet, quarter cubic, or gyroid. And then if you're into flexible 3D prints, whether you're using flexible PLA, TPU, or TPE, you can use concentric, cross, or cross 3D. Now you'll also notice the one that we didn't talk about is zigzag. Now zigzag, not too important. It's very similar to the way that lines are laid down on your 3D printer. It does each layer, zigzags each layer back and forth, and we can see that here. It's the same type of pattern that you're going to use when you're using your support structures. So let's dive in a little deeper. If you're used models or figurines, you know, if you're using these things as models or figurines, 3D prints don't typically require a great deal of strength. That's because they're not subjected to heavy handling or put under stress. So for such applications, the lines infill, which is, we'll go back to that. The lines infill pattern is the best because it gives the fastest print. Called rectilinear in other slicers, lines produces a 2D grid, but where only one direction is printed per layer. Models like a Starship Enterprise or Wreck-It Ralph or some of the figure models that you see work well with just a simple pattern infill. You're going to go probably no higher than 15% here. I typically don't go over 10%, and you can see how that's changed it a little bit. If we go to 10%, that's going to open it up a little bit more. And we can see that right there. So it's opened it up a little bit more. Now for standard 3D prints, your typical infill density is suggested to be between 15 and 50%. And this is for 3D prints subjected to low stress, such as the above filament guide, which we don't have on here, but I am taking this from another article by All3DP. Just so you know, this is not a sponsored video, but they had a really good article and I wanted to relate it to you guys. So a medium infill strength pattern should be used. Infill patterns such as grid, triangles, or trihexagons are most appropriate. Note, however, that these patterns may increase print time by up to 25% compared to lines. So right now we are on lines. Let's just have a look and see what that grid would look like. So if we go to grid, it didn't increase our time too much, but we see there's a lot more density here. Grid is self-explanatory 2D pattern. The main advantage of grid is print speed, and it's the least complex of the three. Now when we go to triangles, which is our next one, again, these are used for typical strengths, typical 3D prints. You can see there's a much different pattern here, and this is also a 2D mesh made of triangles. This pattern has the inherent advantage in strength when a load is applied perpendicular to the object's face. It also makes sense for parts with thin rectangular components which might otherwise have very few connections between the walls. Now, taking a look at this, we can see how much more dense that is. And again, it didn't add a lot of time to our infill or our print time. But the next one on the list is going to be that trihexagon. Now, again, this is a 2D pattern. It produces trihexagons interspersed with triangles, and we can see that here. So here's our trihexagon, and there is our triangle. One advantage is that hexagons are an efficient shape, making them a strong infill pattern relative to their material usage. In addition to that, hexagon infill has shorter lines to connect each side, leading to fewer issues with bowing from poor point cooling, or poor print cooling, pardon me. And you can see, again, it reduced our time. It didn't increase it, it reduced our time a little bit there. Now, when we get into functional prints such as rockets, your typical infill density is going to be 50%. Or upwards of 50%. Now, the reason that we want to use such a high infill on that is because we really want the strength to be there. You should never have to go over 50% infill. Just to give you an idea, this is what 50% looks like. Taking a look at this model right now, there's 50%, and we can see it's doubled our time to 1 day, 1 hour, and 18 minutes. That's a lot of time to be doing that type of infill. Now, strong candidates for infill patterns include cubic, cubic subdivision, quarter cubic, octet, and gyroid. Let's start with cubic, and we can have a look at that with the infill pattern of 50, which is what Cura is suggesting that you use for something that needs high strength. And you can see here, it's building a cube. If I zoom right in there, it's building a cube on the corner. So as we move up, you can see it gets bigger, and then it comes across its axis. So this is a very strong infill. But again, 1 day, 1 hour, 34 minutes, that's a lot of time to be putting into infill. So now we'll go to cubic subdivision so I can show you what that looks like. And it doesn't take very long for these to load, pretty quick. There we go. So you can see the cubic subdivision. It's keeping areas small, then it's getting larger, and then of course it's getting even larger there. Now, cubic subdivision, this is the variation of the cubic, and it uses less material apparently. So again, we're down to 19 hours, 44 minutes, and we can see that reflected down here as opposed to that 1 day. Now, when we go to octet, which is the next one on our list, it's also known as tetrahedral infill. This pattern stacks pyramid shapes, and we can see that. And we see how strong that would be as we cycle through the layers. That really would give you a very strong print, a very strong product. Now we want to go to quarter cubic, which is the next one on our list. And quarter cubic, this 3D pattern is like octet, but half of the pyramid shapes are shifted with respect to the other half. So we can see that here. We can see how it's offset and how they're shifted. And again, that will give you a lot of strength. But again, it has increased the time for our print. And last but not least, my favorite, which is gyroid. And when I'm using gyroid, I never really go above 15 or 20%. You really don't have to. It is quite a complex pattern. So it's particularly unique 3D pattern, which gives the impression of waves. Nevertheless, it is equally strong in multiple directions. This infill pattern would be therefore a good choice for a part that'll be stressed in multiple ways. Often the above pattern are used even for low infill densities because of their aesthetic appeal. Some makes of this type of effect are known as the gyroid vase. And you can see how the gyroid works here. Now that would be incredibly strong, and using gyroid at 50% is going to take us 2 days and 52 minutes. I don't want to wait 2 days for my cube to print, not at this size. So if I went down to 10%, you're going to see a dramatic change here and see exactly how it's used. And there we go. So you can see how it really offsets, and it does it in multiple patterns across the X and the Y. So it goes in 2 directions and really is a very strong infill. I've used it on helmets at 10%. I've used it on figures, all kinds of stuff. And I think it's one of the best patterns that you could use. Now, let's get on to flexibles. Flexibles are an animal unto themselves, and your typical infill density is from 0 to 100%. That depends on how squishy you want your print to be. So flexible filaments like soft PLA should be used, or should use flexible infill patterns. Excuse me, to preserve the flexible nature of the print. Infill patterns like concentric, cross, and cross 3D work best for these types of prints. So let's take a look at cross, which will be our first one. Actually, concentric was our first one, but let's have a look at the cross one. You can see exactly what I'm talking about. You see how that would give you a lot of air inside your print, so that you would have the ability to still have some squish to it. Again, I wouldn't go over 10% on this. So the cross pattern produces grids of what appear to be very fanciful crosses. The spaces between the crosses and the grids allow for the bending and the twisting of the model. So the other one we want to look at is concentric. Now this one's kind of interesting because this 2D pattern produces waves through the interior of the print. It's mimicking the shape of the outer walls. This is much more like how a stone thrown into water makes concentric circle ripples on the surface of water. So you can see that here, that it just kind of builds up as it goes through. And again, this is going to give you a nice soft feel, a little bit of squishiness to your cube in this case that we're doing. And finally, the last one is cross 3D. What this does, this 3D pattern, it's similar to crosses, but as the print grows, the lines move at inclines. The end result is an object that's slightly more rigid. And so it's not going to have quite the same squishiness that you would want it to have. Now, some additional settings you might want to look into, and one commonly overlooked setting with infill is the infill line direction. So if we type in infill line direction into our search, oh, I'm missing an L, that's why. And there's no B in direction. Oh, I wish I could spell today. You can see here that infill line direction right now is set at 75%, or at 75. It's normally set at 45 degrees by default so that both the X and the Y motors work together to print the infill at maximum speed. However, it may be advantageous to orient the infill at a different angle in order to provide maximum strength or flexibility to your part. So this is where you would change that direction. So if we went back to 45, which is the typical one, normally how we would see this in our Cura setup would be denoted by 2 square brackets, just like that. And again, you've got a little flyout when you hover over that to give you a little bit more information about what the pattern is. So we'll just get out of there. And another commonly overlooked setting is gradual infill. So if we type in gradual infill up here, we'll see now that it's changed it to gradual infill steps. Now these are the number of times to reduce the infill density by half when getting further below the top surface areas, which are closer to the top surfaces, get a higher density up to the infill density. So if you set your infill density to 50%, the areas where it doesn't need extra infill, it's going to widen that out, and then it will allow the infill a little bit more to come to the top. So let's say we wanted 10, and it's giving us a, let's say 5. 5 is not good. Let's say 20 then. 20 gives us the red. 4 is close enough. Gradual infill step height is 1.5 millimeters. So if we go down through this, you can see we have a lot more infill on top, and then as it gets down to the center, it is using less and less infill. As it makes its way to the top, starts to make it a little bit easier to use. This can save material and time while providing sufficient strength to a large print that requires rigidity. The low infill, with low infill, it is difficult to close top surfaces due to the bridging needed between infill lines. This denser infill closer to the top surface is useful so that a clean top surface can be achieved. Now, with that saying, this top surface, if we had something like, let's go back here to our infill. Let's take our infill to 10%, and we're just going to go lines. We'll have a look at that model. And we will just go down here a little bit, and you can see how much infill is not being used. See how just where it needs to have that infill used, like right here, here, and here, it's not putting any in the center until we get closer to the top of the model where it needs to have that infill. And we're going to see it start to produce right about there. And you can see where it's starting to make more infill, and it does the Z, and then it fills it in so that we don't get any pillowing or anything near the top, and we'll have a nice clean surface. So I'm going to link to the article by All3DP down in the description so you can go and have a read for yourself. All3DP has some great articles. We reference them quite often when we're doing videos for you guys to give you the best information that we can. Now, with that said, I want to remind you that we are here every Wednesday and Saturday night. My name is Richard, and of course, if you're new here, please consider hitting that subscribe button. Also hit the little bell so you get notified every time that we do a brand new episode. You can go ahead and buy us a coffee for our efforts, or you can join our Patreon, which we've got, we just relaunched, and we've got some great little incentive tiers there for you. One is including a special Discord, which I will be on Tuesdays and Thursday nights for a couple hours to answer your questions and chat with you. Also, I want to thank Spool 3D for all of the help that they give us with the space that they provide us for our studio space. Right now I'm at home. But until next time, my friends, I want to remind you first and foremost that this up here is a playlist for Cura. I am in the right corner. And I always get that wrong for some reason. So go check out this playlist on Cura. It will help you if you are new to using a 3D printer and if you're using Cura. So go check that out today. And remember that the first layer is always your foundation to a great print. Until next time, I'll see you Saturday night.